A quiet black cameraman named Malik Carter shows up at an extravagant country club wedding, humbly filming with a basic-looking camera setup. The arrogant bride, Tiffany Monroe, snaps, "Stay back! We don't want random photographers ruining my perfect day." Her guests snicker. What none of them know is that Malik isn't just any cameraman. He's a Netflix documentary director, shooting a surprise feature on modern love and class prejudice. By the end of the night, every guest's jaw will drop when the Netflix team rolls in and Tiffany realizes she just mocked the man who could make her famous, or infamous. Before we find out what happens next, tell us, have you ever seen someone treat a worker badly, only to regret it later? And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the immaculate lawns of the Crestwood Country Club. It was a scene of calculated perfection, a world where every flower seemed to have been placed by hand and every blade of grass stood at attention. Inside the grand ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive lilies. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns moved with a practiced ease, their laughter tinkling like the crystal glasses they held. This was Tiffany Monroe's world, a world she had orchestrated down to the last detail for her wedding day. She stood at the center of it all, a vision in a gown that cost more than a modest car, her smile as bright and hard as the diamonds on her fingers. She surveyed her kingdom, her eyes flitting over every polished surface, every perfectly arranged centerpiece, ensuring that reality matched the flawless image in her mind. Her gaze was that of a general inspecting her troops, and for a moment she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. Everything was perfect. Then her eyes landed on him, and the perfection shattered. Near a grand floral arch, a man was adjusting the lens of his camera. He was a black man, dressed in simple, functional clothing, dark slacks and a plain button-down shirt. His camera rig looked basic. It wasn't the sleek, imposing equipment her official photographer, a man she'd paid a five-figure sum for, was using. This man, in Tiffany's mind, was an anomaly, a smudge on her otherwise pristine canvas. He didn't belong. A scowl tightened her perfectly painted lips. He was probably some cheap add-on the venue threw in, or worse, a freelancer trying to poach shots for his sad little portfolio. The thought was intolerable. She would not have her perfect day tarnished by someone who looked so utterly out of place. Her voice, sharp and clear, sliced through the gentle hum of conversation. "Hey, you!" she shouted, her arm extending, a finger pointing directly at him. The room fell silent. Every head turned, following the line of her pointed finger to the man by the arch. "Stay back," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "We already have our photographer." A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd. Some guests, caught off guard, forced smiles, unsure if this was some kind of joke. Others, her closest friends, exchanged knowing smirks. This was classic Tiffany. The man, Malik Carter, slowly lowered his camera. His expression remained placid, a calm island in the sea of sudden tension. There was no anger in his eyes, no flicker of surprise. It was a look of quiet observation, which only seemed to infuriate Tiffany more. The sting of the public humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that Malik felt on the back of his neck, but his training, his entire mission, depended on his ability to absorb it without reacting. He had anticipated this. He had planned for it. He just hadn't expected it to be so loud, so brazen. "I said, don't film me!" Tiffany's voice was even sharper now, laced with a venomous impatience. "You're ruining my shot." The live band, which had been playing a soft jazz melody, faltered, and then fell silent. The lead singer looked at the drummer, who just shrugged. The only sound was the awkward shuffling of feet and the faint clinking of ice in glasses. The guests were no longer smiling. They were staring, their discomfort a palpable force in the room. This was no longer a bride being particular, this was a spectacle. Malik, holding his camera at his side, offered a soft, almost apologetic reply. "My apologies, ma'am." His voice was low and steady, carrying a respect she had not offered him. That composure seemed to unnerve her more than any argument could have. She expected a fight, a protest, a flustered defense. She did not expect this quiet dignity. It was as if he held a secret she couldn't access, a power she couldn't command. She felt a flicker of something she couldn't name, a tiny, unsettling feeling of being outmaneuvered. She shook it off. She was the bride. This was her day. She was in control. She gave a dismissive smirk, a little flick of her wrist as if shooing away a fly. It was a performance for her audience, a signal that the disruption was over, that she had handled it. The humiliation, she thought, was complete. But Malik, with a subtle movement of his thumb, had already pressed the small red button on the side of his camera. The tiny light blinked once, then held steady. The lens was still rolling. He was capturing it all. The bride's arrogant smile, the guests' uneasy glances, the heavy, judgmental silence that now filled the perfect golden room. He had gotten exactly what he came for. The silence in the grand ballroom stretched for a few moments longer, thick and uncomfortable, before Tiffany's bridesmaids decided it was their cue to break it. They clustered together near the cake table, their whispers sharp and cruel, designed to be overheard. "Can you believe the nerve?" one of them hissed, a blonde woman in a pale pink dress. "Showing up with that thrift store camera." Another chimed in. "Honestly, Tiffany did everyone a favor. We don't need that kind of element here." Their laughter was brittle, a poor attempt to restore the festive atmosphere their friend had just shattered. They were reflecting Tiffany's own arrogance back at her, validating her cruelty as an act of maintaining standards. The DJ, a young man with headphones slung around his neck, stood frozen by his booth. He had a party playlist queued up, ready to transition from the live band's gentle set to something more upbeat. But now he didn't know what to do. The air was charged with a negative energy that no pop song could fix. He glanced at the venue manager, who was hovering by the entrance, wringing his hands. The manager gave a slight, helpless shake of his head. The message was clear. Stay out of it. Let the bride have her way. Ethan, the groom, stood beside Tiffany, his smile fixed and unnatural. A deep flush had crept up his neck, a telltale sign of his profound embarrassment. He knew this was wrong. He could feel the judgment radiating from some of the older guests, particularly his own family, who had been raised to believe that kindness was a currency more valuable than money. He opened his mouth to say something, to perhaps gently guide Tiffany away, to de-escalate the situation. But the words caught in his throat. He had learned long ago that confronting Tiffany, especially in public, was a losing battle. It would only lead to a bigger, more humiliating scene later. Conflict avoidance was his default setting, a survival mechanism in his relationship with a woman who demanded total control. So he said nothing. He simply stood there, a silent partner in his new wife's casual cruelty. Malik, meanwhile, executed a slow, deliberate retreat. He didn't scurry away in shame. He simply took a few steps back, his movements economical and calm, until he was near the edge of the room, partially obscured by a large potted fern. He never raised his voice, never made a gesture of protest. A few of the older guests watched him with expressions of quiet disapproval aimed squarely at the bride. One of his aunts caught Ethan's eye and gave a subtle, disappointed shake of her head. Ethan felt a fresh wave of shame wash over him. In a far corner of the ballroom, Lila Green was refilling a tray of champagne flutes. Her movements were swift and efficient, but her eyes were locked on the scene. As a waitress, she was trained to be invisible, to see everything and say nothing. She had seen countless moments of entitlement and bad behavior from the wealthy patrons of the country club. But this felt different. It wasn't just a rude comment, it was a public shaming. She saw the way the bride's friends were laughing, the way the groom stood by and let it happen. And she saw the immense, unshakable dignity in the cameraman's stillness. He hadn't fought back, but he hadn't shrunk either. He had simply absorbed the insult with a grace that made Tiffany's outburst look even more ugly and childish. A hot spark of anger ignited in Lila's chest. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. A guest standing near her, a man in a ridiculously expensive-looking suit, muttered to his companion, "It's just a cameraman. Who cares?" The comment was a casual dismissal, a verbal shrug that stripped Malik of his humanity, reducing him to his job title. That was the part that angered Lila the most. Tiffany, hearing the support from her friends and the dismissive comment from the guest, felt a renewed sense of victory. She had successfully policed the boundaries of her perfect world. She turned her back on Malik, a queen dismissing a troublesome peasant, and raised her glass to her bridesmaids. The crisis was averted. The party could resume. Malik, now positioned in his new, less conspicuous spot, adjusted his focus. He found Tiffany in his viewfinder, her face alight with smug satisfaction. Then he panned slightly to capture Ethan's strained, unhappy expression. He zoomed in on a group of guests whispering behind their hands. He tilted the camera up to catch the DJ, who was now reluctantly starting a slow, inoffensive song. The bride thought she had won. Malik knew the real story was just beginning. He said nothing, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But his internal voice was clear and focused. "Understood, ma'am," he had said aloud. To himself, he added, "I understand perfectly." The lens was still rolling, and the audience watching at home would soon understand, too. They would wonder, as Lila was wondering now, who this man was. Who was this man who could take such a vicious public insult with a calm that felt less like weakness and more like a carefully concealed strength? The sun had not yet risen. Hours before the confrontation in the grand ballroom, the world was quiet and dark. Malik Carter sat in the back of a nondescript production van parked on a quiet side street a mile away from the Crestwood Country Club. The only light came from the glow of 3 monitors in front of him, their screens reflecting in his dark, focused eyes. On one screen was a satellite map of the venue, on another a detailed call sheet with timings and names. On the third, footage from his last project played on a silent loop, a gritty, powerful documentary about food bank volunteers that had earned him an Emmy. A small, golden statuette sat on a shelf in his modest apartment, a world away from the luxury he was about to infiltrate. But Malik was not defined by his awards. He was defined by his purpose. He was Malik Carter, a filmmaker who believed that the most powerful stories were found in the quiet moments, in the interactions people have when they think no one of consequence is watching. He wasn't just a cameraman. He was a storyteller, a seeker of truth. And today, his mission was to capture the raw, unfiltered truth for a new Netflix documentary series tentatively titled Undercover Empathy. The premise was simple yet profound: to explore the hidden kindness and casual prejudice that existed side by side in modern America. The best way to do that, he had argued to the studio executives, was to go undercover. He needed to be seen as unimportant, as invisible. He needed people to forget he was there, so their true characters could emerge. "The truth only shows itself," he had told his producer, Sandra Liu, during a pitch meeting, "when people think you don't matter." Sandra, a woman with a sharp mind and a reputation for backing unconventional projects, had approved it on the spot. So for this assignment, Malik had intentionally dressed down. His clothes were neat but unremarkable, bought from a department store, not a designer boutique. The camera rig he would use was an older model, one that looked dated and almost amateurish compared to the high-end equipment used by top-tier wedding photographers. It was a deliberate choice, a piece of social camouflage. To the wealthy guests of the Monroe wedding, a man with such a camera would be easily dismissed. He would be seen as a low-budget vendor, a person whose presence was tolerable but not important. And that dismissal was the key. It was the trigger he needed to see what lay beneath the polished surface of society's elite. He took a sip of coffee from a thermos, the warmth spreading through his chest. He felt the familiar pre-shoot jitters, not of fear, but of anticipation. He was an anthropologist entering a foreign tribe, a journalist going behind enemy lines. He knew the risks. He would face condescension, dismissal, and, as he would later find out, outright hostility. But he also hoped to find moments of unexpected grace, of quiet compassion. That was the other side of the story he wanted to tell. His phone buzzed. It was a text from one of his crew members, a young woman named Anya, who was already inside the venue, posing as a florist's assistant. The text read, "Hidden cams are in place, audio is clear, we are a go." Malik smiled. He sent a simple reply. "Excellent. See you on the other side." He closed the laptop, the screen going dark, and took a deep breath. He was no longer Malik Carter, Emmy-winning director. He was now just a cameraman, a man paid to blend into the background, a man nobody would notice, a man who, because of that, would see everything. His motive was not revenge or a desire to shame individuals. It was bigger than that. He wanted to hold up a mirror. He wanted to capture a moment so raw and real that it would force millions of viewers to look at their own lives, at their own interactions, and ask themselves a simple question. How do I treat the people who I think don't matter? With that thought solidifying his resolve, he opened the van door and stepped out into the pre-dawn quiet, his old camera rig in hand. The day was just beginning, and the story was waiting to be told. The Crestwood Country Club was already a hive of activity when Malik arrived, slipping in through a service entrance as instructed. The air buzzed with the controlled chaos of a large-scale event coming to life. Florists were arranging massive bouquets, caterers were polishing silverware, and sound technicians were taping down cables. In the midst of it all, Malik found his two hidden crew members, Anya and Ben, who were convincingly dressed in the green aprons of the floral company. They exchanged brief professional nods. No one would ever suspect they were part of a high-level production. Their job was crucial. Over the past hour, they had planted 3 tiny, almost invisible cameras throughout the main ballroom and reception area. One was nestled within a large floral centerpiece on the main gift table, its lens peeking out between a rose and a sprig of baby's breath. Another was discreetly attached to the corner of the DJ's booth, disguised as a piece of audio equipment. The third, the most important one, was hidden in the intricate latticework of the floral arch where the ceremony would take place. These cameras would provide the wide shots, the context, the candid reactions of the crowd. They would capture the genuine behavior of people who had no idea they were on a Netflix set. Lila Green, the waitress, unknowingly walked past the centerpiece camera as she set out place cards. Her path crossed with the story Malik was building, her quiet diligence a stark contrast to the drama that would soon unfold. She was just doing her job, unaware that she was about to become a key character in a narrative about human decency. Malik moved through the venue, his own camera on his shoulder, getting establishing shots of the empty room. He filmed the sunlight streaming through the tall arched windows, the way it glinted off the polished dance floor. He was setting the scene, creating a sense of pristine, untouchable elegance. Then the guests began to arrive, and soon after, the bride. From the moment Tiffany Monroe swept into the venue, the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer a collaborative effort, it was a dictatorship. She moved through the space not with the joy of a bride, but with the sharp-eyed critique of a dissatisfied CEO. She snapped at a florist for a petal that had fallen onto a tablecloth. She barked an order at a young waiter who was a few seconds too slow in offering her a glass of water. She told the band leader that his tempo was depressing. Her voice was a constant, grating presence, a tool to assert her dominance over everyone she considered the staff. Malik observed it all from a distance, his camera capturing these small, ugly moments. This was the texture of the story. This was the behavior that his documentary was designed to expose. When Tiffany finally spotted him, her eyes narrowed. He saw the calculation happening in real time. He saw her brain process the data. Black man, simple clothes, unimpressive. Camera. The conclusion was instantaneous and absolute. He did not belong. He watched her through his lens as she started to walk towards him, her expression hardening from disapproval to open hostility. Her prejudice was a physical thing, a storm cloud gathering on her face. Malik braced himself, keeping his own expression deliberately soft, non-threatening. He gave a slight, respectful nod as she approached, a gesture of deference he knew would likely only fuel her sense of superiority. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he murmured, his voice quiet, almost preemptively apologetic. He was playing his part perfectly. He was giving her all the power, letting her believe she was in complete control. He was concealing the storm brewing beneath his own calm exterior, the storm of a story about to break. He knew that the confrontation to come would be the centerpiece of his film. He just had to let her build the scene herself, one arrogant, misguided word at a time. The wedding reception was in full swing. The band was playing again, the guests were dancing, and the air was filled with a determined festivity. But the earlier incident had left a subtle crack in the perfect facade. People stole glances at Malik, who was now filming discreetly from the sidelines, and then whispered to one another. The story of the bride and the cameraman was already becoming a piece of wedding gossip. Malik eventually retreated to the relative quiet of the service corridor near the loading docks where the catering vans were parked. He needed a moment away from the noise to check his footage. He sat on the cool concrete steps, the sounds of the party muffled behind the thick steel doors. He pulled up the clip of the confrontation on his camera's small screen. He watched Tiffany's face twist in anger, heard her sharp command to stay back. He saw his own calm response. It was powerful. It was exactly the kind of raw, unfiltered moment he had hoped to capture. A voice behind him made him look up. "Excuse me?" It was Lila Green, the waitress. She was holding an empty catering tray, her shift clearly not over. But she had a look of sincere concern on her face. I saw what happened in there," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And I wanted to say I'm sorry. On her behalf. That wasn't right." Malik felt a genuine warmth spread through his chest. This was the other side of the story. This was the unexpected moment of grace he had been looking for. He offered her a kind, appreciative smile. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot, but it's okay." Lila hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "It's not, though," she insisted. "People like her. They think they can treat people however they want just because they're paying for a service. It's not right." Malik looked from her earnest face back down to the screen in his hand. "It's okay," he repeated. But this time his tone was different. It hinted at a deeper meaning, a hidden purpose. "I got what I came for." The words hung in the air between them. Lila frowned, not quite understanding. What could he have possibly come for other than to film a wedding? Before she could ask, Malik added, "Your kindness. It's a part of the story, too." He hadn't planned on revealing anything, but her decency had moved him. Lila looked even more confused now. "Story? I don't understand." "Don't worry about it," Malik said gently. "Just know that I appreciate what you did, what you said." An idea sparked in Lila's mind. She thought he might be planning to file a formal complaint against the bride with the venue management, or perhaps even his own company. She wanted to help. "Well, if you need someone to back you up, if you need a statement or anything, I'll do it," she offered, her resolve hardening. "I saw the whole thing. I'll tell them exactly what she said and how she said it." She had no idea how significant her offer was. She thought she was offering to testify in a small internal dispute about a wedding vendor. In reality, she was offering to be a key witness in a nationally broadcast documentary. She was stepping out of the background and into the spotlight of a much larger narrative about justice and respect. Malik looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just a waitress. She was an ally. She was a person of character who was willing to risk her job to stand up for a stranger. "Thank you, Lila," he said, making a mental note of her name from her name tag. "I might just take you up on that." He closed the viewing screen on his camera and stood up. He had the villain of his story. And now he had just found his hero. Inside the ballroom, the champagne continued to flow freely. Ethan Monroe watched his new wife hold court on the dance floor, her laughter loud and triumphant as she danced with her father. The joy on her face should have made him happy, but instead it just filled him with a gnawing sense of unease. The scene with the cameraman kept replaying in his head, the man's quiet dignity, Tiffany's sneering contempt, his own cowardly silence. He took a long sip of his drink, the expensive whiskey, doing little to dull the sharp edges of his regret. He should have stepped in. He should have said something, anything, to defend the man from Tiffany's unnecessary attack. He could have just put a gentle hand on her arm and said, "Honey, it's okay. Let the man do his job." It would have been so simple, but he hadn't. And now the memory of his inaction felt like a stain on the day, a day that was supposed to be the happiest of his life. He saw Tiffany leave the dance floor and head towards a circle of her closest friends, who were gathered near the towering wedding cake. He watched as she began to speak, her hands gesturing dramatically. Even from across the room, he could tell she was recounting the story. And she wasn't recounting it with shame or regret. She was boasting. Her friends erupted in laughter, and Tiffany took a theatrical bow, a smug grin on her face. She was turning her cruelty into an amusing anecdote, a story about how she had to put that cameraman in his place. Ethan's stomach churned. This was who he had married, a woman who found sport in humiliating others. The realization landed with a heavy, sickening thud. At that same moment, Lila Green was clearing plates from a nearby table. She couldn't help but overhear the conversation. Tiffany's voice was proud, dripping with condescension. "And you should have seen his face," she was saying. "He just froze, like he didn't know what hit him. I had to take control. You just can't let people like that ruin things." Lila felt her anger from earlier returning, hotter this time. She looked over at Ethan and saw the miserable expression on his face. He knew it was wrong, but he was too weak to stop it. Deciding she couldn't just stand by, Lila discreetly pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen as she found the contact information for Malik's small, independent-looking production company she'd found online earlier, assuming it was his. She sent a quick anonymous message to the general inquiry email, hoping he would see it. "The bride is bragging about what she did to you, to all her friends. Thought you should know." She hit send, her heart pounding. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt important. Miles away in the production van where Anya was monitoring the hidden camera feeds and communications, the email popped up. She immediately forwarded it to Malik's phone. Out in the cool night air of the service corridor, Malik's phone vibrated. He read Lila's message. A slow, determined smile spread across his face. This was better than he could have hoped for. The initial incident was damning enough. But the fact that she was now boasting about it, turning her prejudice into a punchline, added a whole new layer to the story. It removed any possibility that she could later claim it was a misunderstanding or a moment of stress-induced anger. This was a clear pattern of malicious behavior. He typed a simple reply, which Anya relayed back to the company email Lila had contacted. "Perfect, thank you." Lila's phone buzzed with the notification. Perfect? What did that mean? She had expected him to be angry, or at least frustrated. The one-word reply was cryptic, unsettling. Back in the van, Anya spoke into her headset, which was connected to Malik and the other hidden crew member, Ben. "He got the message. He says it's perfect." She paused, watching the feed from the camera hidden in the centerpiece. It had a clear shot of Tiffany and her friends. "And he says to keep the cameras rolling, especially camera one. He wants every last word." Inside the ballroom, Tiffany continued her performance, oblivious to the fact that her every boastful word was being captured, documented, and preserved for an audience of millions. Tiffany felt invincible. The wedding was a resounding success. Her dress was the talk of the town, and she had successfully vanquished the random cameraman who had threatened to disrupt her perfect aesthetic. Riding high on this wave of self-satisfaction, she decided to share her victory with the world. Surrounded by her giggling bridesmaids in the plush bridal suite, she pulled out her phone and opened TikTok. "Okay, girls, get in the frame," she commanded, her voice bubbly and fake. She hit the record button. "OMG, you guys. You will not believe the wedding crasher we had to deal with today," she began, her face a mask of mock exasperation. "Some random cameraman with, like, a camera from the 90s tried to get all up in my ceremony." Her bridesmaids chimed in with performative gasps and eye rolls. "She totally handled it, though," one of them said, leaning into the camera. "She was iconic." Tiffany laughed, lapping up the praise. "I literally had to tell him. Stay back," she said, mimicking her own harsh tone from earlier. "You just have to be firm with some people, you know? You have to protect your vibe." She blew a kiss at the camera and ended the video with a flippant caption. "Had to check a wedding crasher today. Bridezilla mode. My day. My rules." She posted the story and watched with glee as the views started to climb. Hundreds, then thousands. The comments started pouring in. Most were from her followers, fawning over her dress and congratulating her. Many added laughing emojis to her story, cheering on her savage behavior. She felt a rush of validation. She wasn't just a bride. She was an influencer, a content creator. This little drama was just adding to her brand. Then a comment appeared that made her pause. It was from a user she didn't recognize, someone with a profile picture of a movie poster. The comment was simple. "Isn't that Malik Carter, the Netflix guy?" Tiffany froze. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. Malik Carter. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She quickly typed it into a search engine. The results flooded her screen. Images of the man she had just humiliated. But this time he was standing on a red carpet, holding an Emmy. Articles praising his groundbreaking and compassionate documentary work. A link to his professional page, which listed Netflix as his primary partner. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, began to creep up her spine. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The man at her wedding was nobody. He was insignificant. This man on the screen was important. The two realities couldn't coexist. One of her bridesmaids, looking over her shoulder, read the comment and laughed. "Oh my God, Tiff, that would be hilarious. Imagine if you just yelled at some famous director." "It's not him," Tiffany snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. She locked her phone and threw it onto the bed. "It's just someone who looks like him. A coincidence." She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. She tried to dismiss it, to push the thought away, but the seed of doubt had been planted. An unease, like a tiny crack in a perfect facade, began to flicker deep inside her. What if it was him? The thought was too terrifying to entertain. She had built her entire identity around her image, her connections, her perceived status. If she had just publicly humiliated a man who held the kind of cultural power a Netflix director did, the consequences would be catastrophic. No, she told herself again, more forcefully this time. It was just a random guy. It had to be. She picked up her champagne glass, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly, and went back to the party, determined to ignore the cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The party raged on, a symphony of forced laughter and loud music. But Malik Carter was no longer a part of it. He had slipped away from the grand ballroom, leaving the noise and the glittering lights behind. He walked across the manicured lawn, the cool night air a welcome relief. The scent of cut grass and damp earth replaced the cloying sweetness of perfume and cake. He found a quiet spot behind the guest house, under the vast, star-dusted sky, and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name, Sandra Liu. He pressed the call button and held the phone to his ear. It rang twice before she picked up. Sandra's voice was exactly as he remembered it from their meetings, calm, professional, and radiating an effortless authority. "Malik," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sandra," he replied, his own voice low and steady. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "For the footage you promised me?" "Never too late." "How did it go?" she asked, a hint of anticipation in her tone. Malik allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He leaned against the cool stone wall of the guest house and looked back towards the distant glow of the reception. "We got it," he said. "We got more than we ever could have hoped for." He quickly summarized the events of the evening, the bride's initial public confrontation, the mockery from her friends, her subsequent boasting about the incident, and the unexpected kindness of the young waitress, Lila. He painted a vivid picture for her, a story of arrogance and empathy colliding in the most dramatic way. Sandra was silent for a moment on the other end of the line, processing the information. When she finally spoke, her voice was decisive. "This is the centerpiece of the episode, Malik. Maybe the whole series." "I agree," he said, "and I have an idea for how to close the loop." "I'm listening." "She's proud of what she did," Malik explained. "She thinks she won. I want the consequences to be as public as the humiliation was. I want to bring the truth to her doorstep." Sandra understood immediately. "You want the full crew." "The full crew," Malik confirmed. "Lights, sound, multiple cameras, the works. Not as a punishment, Sandra. As a reveal, a moment of irrefutable truth." "I like it," she said, the approval clear in her voice. "It's bold. It's cinematic." She paused, and he could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. "Let's make it unforgettable. We'll be there in the morning. My assistant will coordinate with you on the details. Just tell us when and where." "I will," Malik said. "Thank you, Sandra." "No, Malik," she replied, her voice softening for the first time. "Thank you. This is why we hired you. Now go get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day." They hung up. Malik stood in the quiet darkness for a few moments longer, the phone still in his hand. He looked up at the stars, feeling the immense weight and power of the story he was about to unleash upon the world. Back inside the ballroom, the DJ played the last song of the night. Tiffany and Ethan swayed together on the dance floor, locked in a final obligatory embrace. The wedding party cheered and clapped, their faces flushed with champagne and blissful ignorance. They were all characters in a story they didn't even know was being written, celebrating the end of a perfect day, completely unaware that the real show, the one the whole world would be watching, was about to begin. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that felt fundamentally different, at least for Tiffany and Ethan Monroe. The post-wedding bliss they had anticipated was replaced by a strange, formal summons. A crisp, polite assistant from the Crestwood Country Club had called them in their honeymoon suite, requesting their presence in the main ballroom for a special announcement and a token of apology regarding the minor disturbance from the previous day. Tiffany was intrigued and slightly flattered. She assumed the club was going to offer them a complimentary stay or some other lavish gift to apologize for the presence of the rogue cameraman. "See," she said to Ethan as she put on a fresh layer of lipstick. "They know how to treat their VIP guests. This is what happens when you stand up for yourself." Ethan, however, felt a prickle of anxiety. It seemed overly formal, unnecessarily dramatic. But he followed Tiffany, his steps hesitant, down the grand staircase and towards the ballroom. When they pushed open the heavy oak doors, the scene that greeted them was not what they expected. The room, which had been filled with flowers and guests just hours before, was now a flurry of professional activity. Large lighting panels on tall stands cast a bright, clinical glow. Thick black cables snaked across the polished floor. Several serious-looking people with headsets were moving equipment, their voices low and professional. It looked like a movie set. Tiffany's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. What? What is all this? She stammered, her eyes wide. A woman with sleek black hair and an impeccably tailored suit stepped forward, extending a hand. She radiated an aura of calm, unshakable authority. Mrs. Monroe, I'm Sandra Liu, an executive producer with Netflix. Tiffany's heart gave a violent lurch. Netflix. The name from the comments section. The name she had tried so desperately to dismiss. Her mouth went dry. Netflix? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan looked from Sandra to Tiffany, his own confusion mounting. I don't understand. What's this about? We're here to film a brief segment for our new documentary series, Undercover Empathy, Sandra explained, her voice smooth and even. Her gaze was penetrating, giving nothing away. We felt it was only right to include you in the conclusion of a story that you feature in so prominently. You'll want to be seated for this. She gestured towards two simple chairs placed in the center of the room, directly in the path of three large cameras. Guests from the wedding party, who had also been summoned under various pretenses, began to file into the room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and confusion. They were directed to stand along the sides like a silent audience at a play. Tiffany's father looked particularly bewildered, his hand on his wife's arm. What's this about? Tiffany demanded again, her voice rising with a note of panic. She was losing control of the situation, and it terrified her. And then he stepped forward. He emerged from behind one of the large lighting rigs, and for a moment Tiffany didn't recognize him. He was no longer the humble, unassuming cameraman from the day before. He was wearing a sharp black blazer, his posture was confident, and his eyes held a calm, commanding intensity. It was Malik Carter. He held not a camera, but a director's monitor. He stopped beside Sandra Liu, his presence filling the space. The transformation was so absolute, so stunning, that a collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. Malik's gaze met Tiffany's. His expression was not one of anger or triumph. It was neutral, observational, the look of a storyteller who was about to reveal the final, crucial chapter. It's about what people do, Malik said, his voice clear and resonant, filling the cavernous room, when they think no one important is watching. The air in the ballroom was thick with a stunned silence. Tiffany stared at Malik, her mind struggling to reconcile the man in the blazer with the man she had dismissed so easily the day before. Her brain was short-circuiting. This couldn't be real. Sandra Liu gave a subtle nod to a technician sitting at a control board. Roll the clip, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. A large screen, which had been discreetly placed against the far wall, flickered to life. The image that appeared was shockingly familiar. It was the floral arch. It was her wedding. And there she was, a vision in her designer gown, her face contorted in an ugly scowl. Then her own voice, sharp and cruel, echoed through the ballroom's professional-grade speakers, a sound system far more powerful than the one used for the wedding band. "Hey, stay back, we already have our photographer." The footage was raw, uncut, and brutally honest. The camera angle was from a low position, making her look domineering and imperious. The clip continued, playing her next line with devastating clarity. "I said, don't film me. You're ruining my shot." The camera then panned slightly, capturing the shocked and uncomfortable faces of her guests. It captured her bridesmaids snickering. It captured Ethan's pained, helpless expression. And it captured her own smug, dismissive smirk as she turned away, believing she had won. A wave of audible gasps swept through the onlookers. Several guests put their hands to their mouths, their faces turning pale with second-hand embarrassment. Tiffany's father, a man who prided himself on his reputation, looked utterly horrified. He took a half-step forward as if to stop the screening, but his wife held him back. Tiffany herself felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The color drained from her face. Seeing her own behavior played back, stripped of the self-serving narrative she had built around it, was like being doused in ice water. This was not a powerful bride taking control. This was a bully. The clip ended, and the screen went black. But the sound of her own laughter, captured by one of the hidden microphones as she boasted to her friends later, echoed for a moment longer in the silent room. It was a haunting, ugly sound. Malik Carter stood quietly, his arms crossed, letting the weight of the moment sink in. He let the truth do the work. He didn't need to say a word. Sandra Liu stepped forward again, her expression unreadable. "This footage," she announced to the stunned audience, "was captured for our documentary series. It was filmed and directed by Malik Carter." She paused, letting the name and title land with the force of a physical blow. One of the most respected documentary filmmakers working with Netflix today. Jaws literally dropped. The whispers that followed were frantic and disbelieving. Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was all true. The comment on her TikTok, the sickening feeling in her stomach. It was all horribly, nightmarishly true. She had not just been rude to a vendor. She had publicly humiliated an Emmy-winning director who was secretly filming her for a global streaming platform. Malik finally spoke, his voice calm and devoid of malice. It was the voice of a documentarian, stating a simple, observable fact. "I wasn't here to film your wedding, Mrs. Monroe," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "I was here to film humanity, its flaws, its prejudices, and its fleeting moments of grace." He then glanced towards the back of the room where Lila Green was standing, having been invited by the production team. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. Tiffany followed his gaze and saw the waitress, the girl who had offered him a kind word, the girl who was part of a story that Tiffany was too blind to see. In that moment, the entire world she had so carefully constructed, a world based on appearances, status, and control, crumbled to dust around her. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Even before the Netflix team had finished packing their equipment, the digital world had erupted. A teaser for Undercover Empathy, expertly cut and released by the Netflix marketing team, went viral within the hour. It featured the most damning part of the clip, Tiffany's shout, followed by the stunning reveal of Malik Carter in his director's blazer. The story was irresistible. It was a modern-day fable of hubris and consequence. By noon, #Tiffany Monroe and #Netflix Bride were trending on every social media platform. The TikTok video she had posted, the one where she bragged about her behavior, was now stitched and duetted thousands of times, with creators universally condemning her actions. The comments were a tidal wave of public scorn. Her carefully curated online persona was shredded in a matter of minutes. The real-world consequences followed just as swiftly. A luxury lifestyle brand that had a sponsorship deal with Tiffany for her influencer work released a public statement announcing they were severing all ties, citing that her behavior did not align with their core values of respect and inclusivity. The Crestwood Country Club, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, issued a fawning public apology, not to Tiffany but to Malik Carter and Netflix. They offered to host a charity screening for one of his future projects, free of charge. The story had a villain, and everyone was desperate to prove they were on the side of the hero. The most painful confrontation, however, happened not online, but in the silence of their honeymoon suite. The grand arrangements and complimentary champagne sat untouched. Ethan finally found his voice, the one he had suppressed the day before. There was no anger in it, only a profound, weary sadness. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Tiff," he said, shaking his head. "You cared more about your image, about control, than about a person's basic dignity. You didn't just embarrass that man. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself." "They tricked me," Tiffany sobbed, the tears finally coming. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. "It was a setup. He came here looking like that on purpose." "He came here to see who you really were," Ethan corrected her, his voice quiet but firm. And you showed him. You showed everyone. The realization of what she had lost, not just the sponsorship or the public approval, but the respect of her new husband, finally hit her. She collapsed onto the bed, her body shaking with a despair so deep it felt like a physical illness. She had been so obsessed with creating the perfect picture that she had destroyed the real thing. Through it all, Malik Carter remained silent. He gave no interviews. He posted no personal statements on social media. When a reporter from a major news outlet managed to get him on the phone, he simply said, "The footage speaks for itself. The story isn't about me or Mrs. Monroe. It's about how we choose to treat each other." He chose grace over revenge, observation over condemnation. His silence was more powerful than any insult he could have hurled. He let the world draw its own conclusions, and the verdict was unanimous. He didn't need to be the villain in her story because she had so perfectly cast herself in that role. His work was done. The mirror had been held up, and the reflection was now there for all to see. A few weeks later, the first episode of Undercover Empathy premiered on Netflix. The episode, titled The Wedding, was an immediate global sensation. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece of social commentary and a stark, necessary mirror to society. Malik's masterful storytelling elevated the incident from a simple viral moment into a profound examination of class, prejudice, and character. He expertly wove the narrative, contrasting Tiffany's casual cruelty with the quiet decency of other people the crew had encountered, with Lila Green's story being a central focus. Lila, who was featured in a short but powerful interview segment, spoke with simple eloquence about why she felt compelled to speak up. "You don't have to be important to treat people with respect," she said, her words resonating with millions of viewers. "You just have to be a good person." Her life changed overnight. The day after the premiere, she received a call from Sandra Liu. They had been so impressed with her integrity and clear-headedness that they were offering her a paid position as a production assistant trainee on Malik's next project. It was a dream she never knew she had, suddenly coming true. She accepted without a moment's hesitation, her life set on a new, unexpected, and exciting path. Ethan and Tiffany's marriage did not survive the fallout. The chasm that the incident had revealed between their core values was too wide to bridge. They separated quietly, the lavish wedding now just a painful memory of a disastrous beginning. Tiffany, stripped of her sponsors and her social standing, retreated from public life. She deleted her social media accounts, but she couldn't delete the story. She found herself watching the episode on her phone one night alone in a new, much smaller apartment. She trembled with a toxic mixture of regret and anger as she watched the final moments of the show. The screen showed Malik, back in his simple clothes, interviewing a homeless man with the same respect and attention he would give a world leader. Then the narrator's closing words, Malik's own writing, echoed over the scene, a final judgment on her actions. "The way we treat those we think are beneath us is the truest measure of our character. It is the signature of our soul, written not when the world is watching, but when we believe we are alone." The credits rolled, but Tiffany just stared at the blank screen, the narrator's voice seared into her memory. She finally understood. It was never about the camera or the dress or the perfect shot. It was about a test of character, a test she had failed in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. The final montage of the series became a cultural touchstone. It showed Malik Carter in different settings across the country, his camera always present, but never intrusive. He was in a bustling inner-city soup kitchen, sharing a quiet moment with a volunteer. He was on a dusty rural farm, listening to the story of a migrant worker. He was in a high-end corporate office, filming the interaction between a CEO and the cleaning staff. In every scene, his focus was the same: humble, patient, quietly powerful. He was a seeker of truths, big and small, a man who understood that the most important stories often belong to the people who were rarely given a voice. The narrator, in a calm and steady tone, closed the story, leaving the audience with a thought that would linger long after the screen went dark. Sometimes the person you dismiss is the one holding the lens that will define your legacy. The person you overlook is the one telling the story of your life to the world. Respect is a currency that costs nothing to give, but a moment of arrogance, a flicker of prejudice can cost you everything. Tiffany Monroe faded from relevance. Her name became a cautionary hashtag, a shorthand for entitled behavior. She was a ghost in the digital world she once so desperately wanted to conquer, replaced by a viral wave of conversations about empathy, kindness, and the simple, profound act of seeing humanity in everyone, regardless of their station in life. The story was no longer hers. It belonged to everyone. It was a reminder that in the grand, unfolding documentary of human life, you are always on camera, and your character is always on display. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.